What if the moment she took you for granted was the moment you began becoming unforgettable? What if your quiet withdrawal wasn't surrender, but the spark that ignited your greatest evolution? And what if the silence she once overlooked now echoes louder than any apology she could ever make? Let's dive deep into what truly happens when a man chooses self-respect over chasing validation, and how your silent growth becomes the lesson she never saw coming. She thought your patience was permanent, that no matter how many times she pulled away, you'd still be there waiting, chasing, proving, but one day you stopped. This video isn't about bitterness, it's about evolution, about what happens when a man who gave everything finally chooses himself, when you no longer try to convince her of your worth, but instead become undeniable through presence, purpose, and quiet strength. Today, we're diving deep into the cost of being taken for granted, and how your stillness grounded in stoic discipline becomes the echo she can't ignore. If you're ready to understand what happens when you walk away with grace, let's get into it. Number 1, the comfort trap. At first, she loved your presence, your consistency, your attention. It made her feel safe, seen, and chosen. But over time, that presence stopped being a gift in her eyes. It became routine. She started expecting it, not appreciating it. She got too comfortable, too used to the rhythm of your giving. And when someone assumes your presence is permanent, they stop earning it. They stop showing up with effort. That's where the dynamic silently shifts, from gratitude to entitlement. But here's the thing. A man grounded in discipline and self-awareness doesn't stay where he's no longer truly valued. A Stoic understands that staying in spaces where you're merely tolerated, not appreciated, is a slow erosion of dignity. And so you pulled back, not with anger, not with bitterness, but with calm clarity. You stopped showing up on command. You chose silence over repeated explanations, stillness over proving your worth, and that quiet withdrawal. That was the moment everything changed. Because when a woman believes you'll always be there, no matter how she treats you, she forgets what it felt like to earn your energy, to feel chosen, not entitled. She starts to take for granted the things you gave freely, your time, your loyalty, your presence. But you knew better. You understood that unconditional effort without mutual effort in return is self-neglect dressed up as love. And so you stopped. You didn't make a scene. You didn't beg to be seen. You simply became less available, not out of spite, but out of self-respect. As Marcus Aurelius said, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one." So you did. You didn't try to prove you were enough. You remembered that you already are. And instead of asking her to match your energy, you let the silence reveal the imbalance. And now she feels it. Maybe it's in the quiet moments when she wonders why you haven't reached out. Maybe it's in that scroll through your page where she sees a man becoming more mentally, emotionally, physically evolving in silence. No drama, no declarations, just undeniable growth. That's the cost she never calculated. Your transformation in the space she assumed you'd always occupy. You were once a constant, dependable, predictable, but now you're a contrast, a mirror that doesn't reflect need, but power. She took your presence for granted because she never imagined your absence. And now in that space where your energy used to live, there's a void, a silence that speaks, a stillness that haunts. She's learning, now too late, that when a man aligned with his values walks away with peace and purpose, he doesn't need to raise his voice. His absence echoes louder than his presence ever did. Number 2, your glow grew without her. She thought you'd wait, that you'd stay frozen in place while she wandered, unsure, exploring her options, figuring things out. Maybe she thought you'd keep one foot in the door, checking her stories, reading into every like, replaying old conversations in your head, hoping for a text that might never come. She assumed your loyalty meant passivity, that your patience meant paralysis, but instead you upgraded quietly, relentlessly, not out of revenge, not to trigger her curiosity, but because you finally chose yourself. You stopped circling the same emotional loop and redirected that energy inward. Your body changed, not for attention, but to anchor your discipline. You hit the gym not as a cry for validation, but as a ritual for self-mastery. Your mindset shifted from "why did she" to "what can I build?" You stopped chasing temporary reassurance and started asking better questions. Questions that carved your path forward. What kind of man do I want to become? What kind of peace do I refuse to lose again? You didn't wait for her to hand you closure. You built it brick by brick, through action, through detachment, through purpose. And while she drifted between distractions, temporary flings, filtered selfies, loud nights that masked quiet doubts, you were building a new version of yourself. You read more. You trained harder. You rested deeper. You created momentum while she chased moments. This wasn't about proving anything to her. It was about finally proving something to yourself. That's what it means to walk the Stoic path. To move forward with calm intensity, with deliberate focus. Like Seneca said, it is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it. And you stopped wasting it waiting on someone who didn't value what you gave freely. Now look at you. You're no longer the man she left behind. You outgrew that version without bitterness. You shed him like old skin. You evolved into someone she can no longer predict because you stopped needing to be predictable. You're not where she left you because you never stayed in that place. You were too busy becoming the man you were always meant to be. That glow she notices now, that shift in your energy, that's not a reaction. It's a result. The result of stillness, of late nights in the gym, early mornings with purpose, and quiet evenings with a book instead of a breakdown. That's self-respect radiating outward. That's discipline lighting the path. And the irony, she might circle back. Not because you begged, but because you didn't. Not because you convinced her, but because you let her feel your absence with no guarantee of your return. She didn't expect that the true cost of walking away would be your evolution. But that's exactly what it was. And now every version of you that she remembers is outdated, just a snapshot frozen in time. The man you've become, he lives in the present, he walks with clarity. He doesn't look back. Because the man who stops waiting and starts rising becomes unforgettable. Number 3. Attention reclaimed. You stopped giving unlimited access to your time. No more late night replies that left you drained. No more always being emotionally available the moment she needed comfort, validation, or distraction. You drew the line, not to create distance, but to create dignity, because you finally saw your energy for what it is, a treasure. And you stopped throwing it like spare change into conversations that didn't nourish your soul. That's not bitterness, it's maturity. That's not revenge, it's self-respect. You realized something powerful. What is constantly available becomes invisible. But what is rare? It's remembered, it's respected, and most of all, it's never taken for granted again. At first, she didn't notice. She thought your presence would remain on tap, like background music, always there when she needed it. She got used to the convenience of your attention, the comfort of knowing you'd respond instantly no matter how she treated you. But a man who knows his worth doesn't live on standby. He's not a vending machine for emotional validation. You didn't become cold, you became clear. And with that clarity came boundaries. You stopped replying right away, not because you were playing games, but because you were finally living, building, creating, evolving. And suddenly your time wasn't just available, it was occupied with purpose. There's a deep difference between kindness and over-availability. One is rooted in strength, the other in a fear of being forgotten. And once you saw that difference, you couldn't unsee it. You stopped being her emotional safety net and became your own source of stability. That's when everything shifted. You stepped into the mindset of a man who no longer runs on emotional demand, but on personal mission. Like Marcus Aurelius said, the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. And your thoughts. They turned from needing her approval to honoring your own. Now she feels the silence not as absence but as power. That one message you left unread. That thoughtful pause before you answer. That quiet presence that doesn't chase, doesn't beg, doesn't need to be seen. All of it tells a story she never expected. You've stopped orbiting around her gravity, and instead you've become a center of gravity yourself. And that shift, it's magnetic. It pulls at her thoughts, her emotions, her regret, because attention is a currency, and when you gave it freely, it lost its weight. But now it's earned. And that shift rewrites everything. You didn't withdraw to teach her a lesson. You simply stopped offering what was once given without boundaries. You began to treat your attention as sacred, not scattered. And that's when she finally understood. The man who protects his time is the man who finally values himself. Now, before we move forward, I want you to pause, breathe, and think about one area of your life where you've been too accessible, too quick to respond, too afraid to pull back. Share it in the comments. Or if you're keeping it simple, just type, "I protect my peace now," because this next shift, it's where everything starts to change. Number 4, the mystery returned. She used to know your every move, your thoughts, your routines. You were an open book too. Open, maybe. Always available, always explaining, always letting her peek behind the curtain. You gave her comfort through transparency, but in doing so, you gave away too much of your essence. She didn't have to wonder because you were always there offering clarity before she even needed to ask. But now she wonders. She guesses. She questions because mystery returned, and with it intrigue. You stopped narrating your life. You stopped giving her a front row seat to your emotions, your intentions, your next move. Not out of bitterness and not to punish her, but because you evolved. You realized that not every thought needs to be spoken. Not every emotion needs to be explained. A man grounded in stoicism understands that silence isn't a void. It's a boundary, a protection of inner peace. And suddenly, your quiet isn't confusing, it's compelling. She notices the change, the shift in your rhythm, the way you respond, not too fast, not too slow, but with intention. The way you show up, still present, still respectful, but with edges she can no longer predict. That calm presence without the constant commentary. You used to fill in every blank for her. Now you let the blank stay blank. You let her wonder, and in that space she starts to feel something new. Attention she didn't expect. That certainty she once had about you is gone. And that uncertainty, that's what reawakens her interest, because mystery creates space, and in that space her imagination does the work. She starts to revisit old memories, not because you reminded her, but because she's searching for answers she used to take for granted. The way you carried yourself, the way you made her feel safe without saying much. the way you're nowhere and everywhere at once. It's not that you disappeared, it's that you became harder to read. And what's hard to read becomes impossible to forget. You didn't bring mystery back to manipulate her. You brought it back because you finally remembered who you are. You stopped performing. You stopped trying to be fully understood. You started living for yourself, not for her validation, not for anyone's reassurance. And when a man begins to do that, when he lives deliberately, speaks less and moves with quiet strength, he becomes unforgettable. She may never say it aloud, but she feels the shift. And in that stillness, she starts to chase something she never valued enough when it was freely given. Now you live your life on your terms and let her figure out the rest. Number 5. Her ego wasn't ready. She thought you'd always orbit her world, that you'd wait around, that no matter how distant or indifferent she acted, you'd still be there, ready to explain yourself, ready to prove your worth. But your detachment wasn't passive. It was intentional. You weren't being cold. You were being clear. She expected a reaction, a chase, one more attempt to win her validation. But instead, you gave her something much more powerful, your absence. And not the kind of absence that comes from hurt or frustration, but the kind born from clarity. You didn't storm out. You didn't try to hurt her. You simply stepped back with the quiet confidence of a man who no longer needs to beg for a place in someone else's life. This is where Stoicism shows its true strength. You detached, not because you stopped feeling, but because you stopped needing. A man who is anchored in his values, who finds his strength within, no longer plays ego games. He doesn't chase someone just to prove he's wanted. He doesn't fear silence. He doesn't fear being misunderstood, because he's no longer trying to win the approval of someone who failed to appreciate his presence. And that's when her ego takes the hit, because the man she thought she could take for granted, the one she assumed would always be there, became the man she can no longer predict. Her power came from your emotional attachment, and the moment you withdrew that, everything changed. Now she's left wondering, why isn't he reaching out? Why does he seem so unaffected? Has he really let go? That uncertainty stings, not because she lost you physically, but because she no longer holds space in your emotional world. And for someone who once fed her ego with your attention, that loss is louder than any goodbye. She wasn't prepared for this version of you, the one who walks away without bitterness, the one who doesn't play the game because he's already won. The man who stands firm in his peace and lets time reveal what words never could. Number 6. Space became a statement. You didn't argue. You didn't slam doors. You didn't craft a dramatic goodbye hoping she'd chase after you. You simply stepped back, created space. And in that space, she started to feel something she didn't expect. Your absence. Not just physically, but emotionally, energetically, mentally. And that's what caught her off guard. Most people expect conflict. They expect shouting, long messages, emotional outbursts, some visible sign that you're still tangled in it all. But you chose a different route, a higher one. You removed yourself with calm intention. No chaos, no scenes, just a quiet shift in energy that said everything without needing to say a word. That's the kind of move a stoic man makes, not to punish, but to preserve. When a man lives by principle, he doesn't need to prove a point. His silence does the talking. And the space he creates isn't a tactic, it's a declaration. A declaration that says, "My peace matters more than your confusion." Suddenly, the energy changed. She stopped feeling your pull, stopped sensing your emotional availability. And what she once took for granted, it now felt distant. That space you gave her wasn't a pause. It was a reflection. It forced her to sit with the consequences of her own choices. No more safety net. No more guaranteed access to your attention. And the irony, that silence, that space, that steady distance, it echoed louder than any confrontation ever could. It made her realize just how deeply your presence used to fill the room, even when you said nothing at all. And now that it's gone, that absence feels heavier than she expected. You didn't walk away to win. You walked away to realign. You honored your boundaries, embraced your dignity, and let space become your statement. Because sometimes the loudest thing a man can say is nothing at all. Number 7, you didn't collapse, you elevated. She expected you to crumble, to drown in regret, to spiral into overthinking and reach for her just to feel whole again. But that's not what happened. You didn't collapse. You elevated. You rose steadily, quietly, and with purpose. While she assumed your silence meant suffering, you were sharpening your focus. You didn't numb the pain with distractions or run from the discomfort. You faced it. You embraced it just like a stoic warrior. You understood that adversity isn't something to avoid. It's something to use. You let the sting of her absence refine you, not define you. You trained harder. You thought deeper. You moved differently. Each day became a step toward a higher version of yourself, not out of revenge, not to get her attention, but because something within you clicked. The realization that pain is part of the path to greatness. And that transformation, it spoke louder than any words ever could. Because when she looked again, expecting the same man she walked away from, he was gone. In his place stood someone unrecognizable, not in looks alone, but in energy, in posture, in peace. You were no longer the man she left. You were the man she lost. That's the part she didn't see coming. She thought distance would weaken you, that you'd stall without her presence. But instead, you elevated so far beyond what she remembered, she now feels the gap. And it's not just emotional, it's spiritual. You've become someone who doesn't need closure, who doesn't need validation, because your growth is your response. And the most powerful part, you did it in silence. No announcements, no please, just action. That's the essence of Stoicism, turning pain into purpose and letting your evolution speak for itself. Now she's not just dealing with absence. She's facing the reality that she can't reach the man you've become because you've already moved on to higher ground. Take a moment and ask yourself this. Who are you becoming in the silence? Because that quiet evolution, that's not something she can interrupt or undo. It's yours. It's sacred. You didn't rise to prove her wrong. You rose to prove yourself right. That's the kind of transformation no one sees coming until it's too late. So before we dive into the next shift in this journey, I want to hear from you. What part of your growth caught even you by surprise? Drop it in the comments or simply type, "I elevated in silence." Let's keep going, because the next move, it deepens everything she thought she understood about you. Number 8, she felt the shift too late. By the time she realized what you brought into her life, it was already gone. The warmth, the reassurance, the quiet consistency she never had to ask for. All of it had slipped away, not with drama, not with anger, but with the quiet grace of a man who finally chose himself. You didn't announce your exit. You didn't try to teach her a lesson. You simply stopped showing up where you were no longer seen, and in the space your presence used to fill, something unexpected began to bloom. Peace, clarity, and a deeper sense of self. She didn't notice right away, The silence crept in slowly, like a soft fog rolling over a familiar view, blurring what she once recognized but never truly appreciated. At first, she thought you were just busy, distracted, maybe even trying to make a point. But days turned into distance. And that distance, it no longer came with explanations, no more check-ins, no more trying to be understood. Just a steady, quiet detachment that said more than words ever could. Then it hit her. That shift, that change in energy she once took for granted. You were no longer orbiting her world. You were building your own. The man she thought would always be there, waiting, hoping, proving his worth, was gone. Not lost, not broken, just evolved. And what stood in his place was a version of you that no longer asked for recognition because he had already given it to himself. That's what she never saw coming. You didn't become cold. You didn't become cruel. You just became complete without her. You stopped explaining your value and started embodying it. You stopped chasing validation and started cultivating peace. And that transformation, that quiet evolution, it's the kind that doesn't scream for attention, but commands it anyway. Because the most powerful glow-up isn't loud. It's not wrapped in social media updates or forced smiles. It's subtle, internal, stoic. A steady rise built on discipline and self-worth. A man no longer moved by her moods, her silence, or her games. A man who no longer needed closure because he had created his own. You became that man. The man who walked away not with resentment but with resolve. Not to teach her a lesson, but to live his truth. And that kind of departure, it leaves a different kind of echo. One that lingers long after the last message. One that makes her realize too late that she misjudged your depth, your strength, your potential. She felt the shift, but when she finally turned around to reach for the version of you she thought would always wait, all she found was silence, purpose, and a man too far gone to be brought back by nostalgia. You weren't trying to be noticed anymore. You were too busy becoming everything she thought you'd never be without her. Number 9, the lesson lingers. She learned something the hard way. Something no apology, no perfectly timed message, no emotional plea could undo. Lose a good man and you don't always get him back. Not because he slammed the door, not because he vanished in anger, but because he found something more sacred than the relationship itself, his own peace. And once a man discovers that inner stillness, once he chooses himself over chaos, over confusion, over being half-loved, there's no turning back. You didn't disappear to teach her a lesson. You didn't go silent to manipulate her emotions. You simply recognized the truth. You were giving your best in a place that no longer saw it. And so, with quiet conviction, you stopped. Stopped showing up where your value was treated like background noise. Stopped explaining, stopped proving, stopped waiting. And that shift, it said everything that words never could. Because the most powerful message a man can send isn't a confrontation. It's his absence. Now she's left with echoes, not just of your voice, but of your energy, of your calm when things fell apart, of the way you showed up even when it was inconvenient, of the way you made her feel safe without ever needing to be loud about it. And what hurts her the most isn't your silence. It's what your silence represents. The end of being prioritized by a man who asked for so little, yet gave so much. She didn't lose just a man. She lost stability. She lost that rare kind of presence that doesn't need to dominate, a room to be felt, the kind that holds space without suffocating, that listens more than it speaks. that gives not to earn points but because it's in his nature. And when that presence is gone, it leaves a vacuum nothing else can fill. No rebound, no distraction, no forced smile. You didn't throw accusations, you didn't rewrite history, you just let go with grace. And that's why it lingers, because when a man walks away, not out of bitterness, but out of growth, he becomes unforgettable. You became the man who no longer fits into the narrative she built around you. The one where you'd always be there, always forgive, always come back. But that man evolved. And in doing so, he stopped chasing what wasn't nourishing his spirit. A stoic man doesn't seek to be understood by those unwilling to listen. He doesn't shout to be seen. He simply becomes more centered, more grounded, more himself. He lets his silence speak not in anger but in clarity. And that clarity, it echoes in the minds of those who once mistook his calm for complacency. She may never confess it, may never reach out, but she knows. In quiet moments she feels it. The peace she once had access to, now out of reach. That's the kind of lesson life delivers without warning. The kind that can't be softened or escaped. The kind that leaves a woman thinking not just about the man she lost, but about who he became after she lost him. And that truth, that quiet, unshakable truth, is what stays with her long after the messages stop. Number 10. You became the standard. Now every man she meets is compared to you. Not because you begged for a second chance, not because you tried to prove yourself, but because you became. You stopped explaining. You stopped chasing. You stopped bending yourself to be understood. And instead, you rose. You built something she didn't see coming. A version of you that didn't need her validation to thrive. You leaned into discipline, into clarity, into your craft. And the more you aligned with who you truly are, the more unforgettable you became. That's the quiet power of a stoic man. He doesn't try to be someone for everyone. He simply becomes someone so grounded, so full of purpose that his presence lingers even in absence. And now you're the one who lives in the back of her mind. Every man she meets, every conversation, every moment of doubt. There you are, not physically, but as the invisible standard she can't ignore. Because what you gave wasn't noise. It was substance. And what you showed her wasn't performance. It was depth. You didn't become the standard by accident. You became it through resilience, through presence, through silence that wasn't empty, but full of self-respect. You didn't need to announce your worth. You just embodied it. And that changed everything. That's the part she never saw coming. She thought you'd fade, that you'd become a memory. But instead, you became the measure, the quiet benchmark against which she'll weigh future connections and wonder why they don't quite feel the same. Because you didn't just leave, you elevated. And the man who elevates without bitterness, who grows without seeking applause, becomes more than just a memory. He becomes the one who sets the bar. And that's the cost she never expected to pay. In conclusion, the journey you've just explored is not one of bitterness or resentment. It's a story of growth, transformation, and quiet power. You've seen what happens when you choose self-respect over constant validation, when you prioritize your inner peace over external approval. It's about understanding that your worth isn't proven through words or explanations, but through calm, deliberate action and quiet strength. Reflect on what we've discussed today. Are you giving too much of yourself away without balance? Are you staying where you're not truly valued? Remember, choosing silence over endless explanations doesn't make you cold. It makes you clear. It makes you powerful. And as you evolve quietly with stoic discipline, your absence will always speak louder than your presence ever could. The lesson here is simple yet profound. Your value increases when you recognize it yourself first. Don't wait for someone else to acknowledge your worth. Walk your path with dignity, strength, and clarity, and watch how everything around you shifts to reflect your growth. If this video resonated with you, make sure to like it and share your thoughts in the comments below. I genuinely want to hear how these ideas impacted you. Don't forget to check out the recommended videos on screen right now. They're designed to further your journey toward becoming the grounded, powerful man you're meant to be. Thank you for watching. Stay strong, stay stoic, and I'll see you in the next one.